Willkommen zum B2B Dialogue Unplugged, dem Ort, an dem Sie von Industrieexperten erfahren, wie Sie Account-Based Strategien skalieren, ohne dabei Personalisierung oder Profitabilität zu opfern. Mein Name ist Roman Walther und diese Sendung wird präsentiert von Digital Advisory, Ihrem Partner für nachhaltiges Beziehungsmanagement in Marketing und Vertrieb. Heute habe ich einen ganz besonderen Gast bei uns, den Rényi, Gründer und Geschäftsführer von Clear B2B, einer B2B Go-to-Market-Agentur, die bereits vielen Unternehmen in Europa und Nordamerika geholfen hat, Growth-Systeme aufzubauen. Seine Spezialität? Entwickeln von Go-to-Market-Strategien, die B2B Growth den Durchbruch ermöglicht. Und genau dieses Thema bespricht er auch auf unserem LinkedIn Local Vienna Event, das am 8. Oktober in Wien stattfinden wird. Und auf diesem Event fokussieren wir uns auf Account-Based Strategien. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited that you're here and that you're helping companies build predictable pipelines.
It's a pleasure, Roman. Awesome. I've never been to a German deutschsprachige podcast, so it's my first time, but we're going to keep it in English as we agreed because this is too important for me to start messing around and experimenting with my German. So excited to be here, and I love the work that you guys do. And I love the event that you're putting on. I'm kind of jealous of it. Like, we don't have a LinkedIn local here yet in Budapest, but you're giving me some ideas there. So
yeah, and we can collaborate, no problem at all. So Dan, let's start with something uncomfortable.
Oh no.
Yeah, always the difficult things first. So eat the frog, I think it's called. When I talk to CMOs privately, most admit actually that their ABM initiatives are struggling or they actually already have failed. And you have built growth systems for so many companies. What would you say are the three most common reasons why European mid-market companies fail at account-based marketing? And what is important, how can they avoid these pitfalls from the beginning?
Yeah, big question and indeed an uncomfortable one. So let's start with this. Every single time there's a failure or something is not working, I go and look at the fundamentals. So whenever somebody tells me that ABM is not working, you can already suspect that it's the bigger picture that has a problem. So usually the go-to-market system itself might be on shaky grounds because account-based marketing is just a subset of go-to-market. In other words, a subset of how you take your product or service to market. So when somebody tells me ABM is not working, I usually ask them, okay, are the other things working that you're doing? And if yes, then what are the fundamentals that must be in place 100% in order for something like account-based marketing to work? So I usually look at that. So we can get into that deeper, but
what are these fundamentals you're talking about? So what are actually companies missing very often?
Right. Okay. So let's start by getting a few things straight about account-based marketing. Okay. So account-based marketing, what differentiates it from other forms of selling and marketing your products is that with account-based marketing, you usually have a clear set of target accounts that are known. So you don't just target any market, you know the specific companies whom you are targeting and you're able to obtain information about. Okay. And in order for this to work, the very first thing that must be in place is knowing what types of companies you're able to target. In other words, the ideal customer profile. So the ideal customer profile is basically the definition of who am I targeting? Who makes up my ideal audience in this given campaign? Usually, this is too vague, and that's problem number one. Okay. Problem number two is, let's say the ideal customer profile is in place. Okay. And we know that we target, DACH companies, especially in, Germany, who are between a certain size in a certain industry, in a certain sub vertical within that industry with the characteristics 1, 2, and 3. For example, they have, accountant teams of at least 5 people. Okay, so that might be an interesting characteristic if you are selling to companies in a certain industry. So let's say you have this in place, okay, and that would be having defined your ideal customer profile. The next thing, which is a common fundamental flaw, is that companies would then use undifferentiated messaging to all stakeholders and not even be aware of all the stakeholders who are involved in making a decision. Okay, so what I'm talking about precisely is that when you try to sell high value products and services, there's almost always going to be more than one person who is taking part in that process. Okay, so you're going to have the decision maker, you're usually going to have the end users of the product and the service, because the decision maker might not be the end user of your product or service. And you're going to have influencers. You're going to have people who are against you, who are trying to block you from selling into the company because it goes against their interests, for real or perceived. But they're going to be disinterested in you selling. Unless you know these internal power dynamics and power plays, you can't really devise a good message and a good narrative that's going to go in, that's going to help you actually open these accounts and then do a good job at providing value and eventually selling. Okay, so that's number two, like mapping the buyer personas who take part in the process and the internal processes. And number three, let's say you have the first two down. So you're clear on the ICP, you're clear on the buyer personas, you know what to tell the buyer personas. Then the next step is basically making sure that you are positioned adequately and that your messaging is in place. Okay. And what that means is that because you are targeting individual companies in most ABM scenarios, okay, not always, but let's take the most typical ABM scenario where you target known companies one by one. It's called one-to-one ABM. Like having a clear narrative and points of differentiation and basically the right messaging is the third thing that might be lacking, it might be missing. Okay, so
yeah, interesting. Yeah. So what I'd like to add is the first point you said, and what helped also our customers would be interested. What do you think about it? Is when defining the ICP is not only creating qualification criteria, but actually also creating disqualification criteria. So that sometimes when creating qualification criteria, the actual market you're addressing is too big and the segment is too big. So it helped very often to define which criteria disqualifies actually a company to be in my target.
100% true. So that goes back to the first step, which is defining the ICP. And a very thorough way to do that is to not just define, but as you say, define who not to target, because very often that's going to be a very useful way to go about it. We can go into some examples. So like what could be some disqualification criteria? Some people will say and it gets messy because when you get into disqualification criteria, you'll often find that they are just filters for targeting the ideal customer profile. But I'll go into examples because it's a lot more clear. So some people would say, okay, if the target company is using a competitor's product, then it's a disqualification criteria. But if you are able to access a database that will give you what technology your target market is using, then you can already set that as qualification criteria. So it's not like you need to go So you don't need to go in depth. So what we call disqualification criteria is the stuff that comes up after like deeper research that is not immediately available, or when everything else looks right that you're able to gather from the open internet from various sources, and you dig a little deeper, then usually there are these yellow flags or red flags, and those will be disqualification criteria. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say if you are selling an up-and-coming product that you know is very much advanced and very innovative, some companies have found, and this is not going to be 100% politically correct, but it's still the truth. So some companies will say that, okay, if the decision maker is over 50 years of age, our chances of getting into that company are minimal. Okay, and this is not discrimination. It is discrimination in a way if you think about it, but what can you do about it? So that doesn't mean that nobody's going to go for 50.
I'm 47, so I'm soon not. Beware what you beware.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting close to that as well. So it doesn't matter, but so I've heard this be a criteria before. Okay. The other thing can be, which is solid disqualification criteria, for example, is having a certain role within the company, such as procurement. So if you find during the sales process or like very early on that in order to sell to the target company, you need to go through procurement, you can say, okay, forget that because I'm just much better off focusing on companies where the sales cycle is much faster because there's no procurement. Okay, so this is something else that I've come across as disqualification criteria.
Okay, cool. So let's assume now we have done the foundational work and defined the ICP, the buying committee, the messaging towards those specific roles in the buying committee. Then we just launch the AI engine, press the red button, and everything is done, right? No kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. But you are using a very specific term in your communication, which is AI native growth system. I mean, everybody is now confronted with AI and how AI can help us all to be more efficient and also to produce content faster and support us in our processes. And you're using it as not you're using it as not AI enhanced or AI powered, but AI native. That suggests a fundamental difference in how you architect these systems. Can you break down what an AI native ABM system actually looks like and which pieces it supports us? And maybe you can walk us through your framework from identifying target accounts to getting them on a discovery call.
Okay, right. So as I said in the beginning, I'm a very much let's go back to the roots and let's go back to the basics guy. So in most of our projects with clients, what usually happens is the system we need to build so it's not an optimization project. We don't make an existing thing better. There usually is no existing system and we need to build it, or it's so underperforming that we just forget about it and we start from scratch and pretend that it doesn't even exist. So when we start from the ground up, we have the luxury of questioning every assumption and starting with a blank slate. And when you do that, you always think about what the building blocks should be and the process should be. So what are the steps, who are the customers, etc. And then you find the best way to build and architect that system. And when you have the luxury to start with a blank slate, then you can basically use the existing technology to help you define the process even, okay? So you know the end goal, and as you're figuring out the best way to get there, you can take AI as a foundation and the opportunities that AI gives you, as opposed to having to adhere to strict blocks. For example, like we have a huge database and we can only use this provider to send out emails, or our hands are tied in 2 other places, so we have to use that exact process. Because obviously the more constraints you have, the less opportunity you have to, build something that is optimal for the given project. So yeah, that's the distinction that I make. And I don't think it's a super important distinction, as we've said in the beginning. So how much you use AI is not the question at the end of the day. So you're not going to get a raise based on how much AI you've used or whether you're AI enhanced or AI native. Nobody actually gives a shit about that. They care about revenue, profit at the end of the day. And all we're trying to do is find the best way to get there, to build pipeline and subsequent revenue and subsequent profit. But AI native just refers to the fact that, okay, we can just throw out everything at the window and rethink the way we've been doing things for the past 15 years with the technology that we have available, which, by the way, is like changing every 6 months and it's blowing us all away. So back to your question, specifically what that looks like is right away in the most important stage of your work, which is research. It's totally changing the game. So desk research and secondary research has been completely transformed, because what companies used to do, and we as an agency used to do, is put talented people on this task, usually young kids, and we would give them a list of target accounts and a list of criteria which to research. And we'd be like, okay, man, go and do it and dig up the annual reports, dig up the websites, find the interviews, listen to the interviews, look at their social media presence, a shit ton of work. 30, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, over an hour per target account. Really deep. Obviously, with the research models that we have available, this time is decimated. So it's like it can be very thorough and very exact. Lots of caveats because it does tend to hallucinate. If you don't catch it, it might go in the wrong direction and your prompt is not specific enough, and it will give you something that is totally credible and looks very concise, but is slightly off. And then it spans into something that is like very much off. So what I'm referring to is when you're sailing across the Atlantic Ocean and you don't notice that you've missed your target by a few degrees and you don't know that you need to correct, then you're going to miss your target by 700 kilometers at the end of the ocean. So that's what AI can do if you're not careful. You'll still get across the ocean, but 700 kilometers from where you want to be. So yeah, that's super important. So there are lots of caveats. You've got to be careful. It's not a magic bullet. It is a magic bullet, actually, if you think about it, because used the right way, it can really give you wings, but it's a double-edged sword if you think about it. And that's just the first phase, which is research.
Yeah. I mean, what he is saying here is also, I think, an important piece of it, that you don't need extensive budget to do research, but you can do research by now, even if you have smaller budgets. And I think that's a very important piece. There is basically no excuse anymore. I'm doing ABM blindfolded, because you really can use the technology to make educated decisions then along the process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And one more important thing here that is specifically true for research. So you have mentioned, and I also agree with the general notion that if you have a broken process, putting AI on top of it is not going to help you. It's just going to amplify your mistakes and your ignorance or whatever. Not always true. So in the case of research, what often happens is companies know very well that they need to do research, and they put their 24-year-old SDRs on this task who are by their nature not very research-oriented people, because, they got a job where they have to do cold calls and cold emails. So by their very nature, they're not going to be very detail-oriented and going down rabbit holes. They're going to be more extroverted, outgoing people. So that's like one common problem with the whole notion of how we do go to market, but that's a side note. Okay, what if you have the process? Everybody knows that they're supposed to be doing deep research, but they either don't do it or they don't do it to an extent that is appropriate. So maybe research is just an afterthought. Let's quickly look at some sources. And then if you put a good AI process in place, then AI will actually be doing the right things with the right guardrails. So in this instance, yes, AI can be a cure, even if you haven't been doing a good job at the certain process before.
Good point.
Yeah.
We're talking about budgets and also a technology stack. I mean, we are very often confronted with reports from the US where companies burn $2 million in ad spend to figure out what works. Companies are copy-pasting processes from the US and then are wondering, why does it not work? You are specifically focusing on capital efficient growth system. What does that actually mean in practice? And let's say if I'm a B2B company selling a 50K to 200K solution with a 18-month sales cycle, by the way, that's also very much different to US companies. What's the minimum viable tech stack and team setup that you would need to run an ABM program?
Okay. So the first answer, what is capital efficient growth? It's when you have a certain amount of money and you can't afford to spend millions of dollars on research reports and testing and validation and whatnot. Okay. The biggest problem or the biggest challenge that I see when I'm trying to sell an ABM project is that leaders will tell me, okay, but we tried this and we got burned, and we tried that and we got burned. So I think the safest thing to do is just to hire another sales rep or another salesperson or a superstar's sales dude who's going to have the Rolodex, who's going to have the contacts to take us into the right companies, and everything feels like a gamble. So that's the first like major pain point or problem that's keeping leaders up at night is when it comes to investing in growth, everything just feels like a freaking gamble. We've been burned by a lot of times. Agencies, ads, bought lists, went to trade shows, and we just don't know what to do. So what we've been experimenting with is a way where you can get feedback and validation to your message, your positioning, your narrative very fast while spending very little amounts of money. More specifically, this campaign that we've engineered is 8 weeks from start to finish. So all the way from, looking at the basics to getting validation and even optimization. And it usually involves advertising, which I can tell you people are freaked out about. They're like, oh my God, I have to spend money on ads. That feels like such a gamble. Yet they'll happily spend that money, which is like, 3,000 euros. They'll happily spend that money at a trade show or somewhere more conventional. But as soon as you start speaking about advertising, will pull up a lot of resistance. Yes, so that's the thing. An 8-week project with a 2,500, 3,000 euro ad budget is sufficient to get a lot of information, meetings, qualified meetings, and just be in a much better position in terms of knowing what the market resonates with.
So what would you say when investing in such a minimal viable tech stack is, and to run an ABM program is, when would the company first expect an ROI on that investment?
Okay, so you said in your example, the 50K product, it's not a very high ticket offer in terms of like when you compare it to other ABM projects. If we're between, I don't know, 10 and 100K, the sales cycle shouldn't really be all that long. So it shouldn't be over a year. It should be under 8 months, or ideally even less, ideally a lot less. In that case, so I don't think the tech stack is what is significant here. So what we use in this is really, it's so minimal because it's just, messages, it's ads, it's landing pages. You can make it get fancy and add automatic outbound emails, but it's not really necessary. But even that doesn't have a lot of expense. So most of the expense here, as far as technology, is not going to go into software. It's going to go into ads, into advertising, which is just a way of getting information and feedback. So I find that as soon as you frame it like that, the resistance goes down towards using paid ads. Okay. So you're actually getting information and feedback if you're doing it the right way. What do B2B companies do most of the time? They're like, okay, yeah, this LinkedIn ads thing, it's been around here. And hey, look, we got a 300 euro coupon that we have to use. Let's not let it go to waste. Johnny, you come over here, create a LinkedIn campaign, okay? Read about what a good LinkedIn campaign looks like and just put us on LinkedIn right now and let's test it with $5,000, whatever. So when you do it like that, what do you expect? And most of the growth experiments, I'm sad to say, are like that. So very ungrounded, very haphazard, random, lack of assumptions, a lot of assumptions, a lack of empirical evidence and rigor to actually putting a hypothesis, testing out the cases, and then getting real learning. So not only do you spend the money, you get a binary response. Did it work? Did it not work? Or a lot of times we don't even know if it worked. So that's absolutely the problem. And that's why leaders are so cautious about investing anything that has to do with growth.
And what would you say, how should the team be set up to run such a pilot program?
Great question. So in these ABM pilots, we used to say that we need an SDR. We need somebody who is a strategist, basically, who's going to lead the pod. We need someone who is going to do the talking when it comes time to do, obviously, sales calls or demos or discovery calls. And then that's basically it. Now, we do have to mention that.
Sorry for interrupting. So for all the listeners in the German-speaking world, SDR is not a common abbreviation. So it stands for Sales Development Rep. We also call it sales assistants, I would say.
Okay.
And so, as we have talked previously in the German-speaking world, the terms that are used in the area of account-based marketing are still not that common. So just for everybody to know.
Okay. So sales assistant. Okay, great. Today, a lot of times the SDR can be switched up. So you don't necessarily, because, AI is going to do the messaging. And so it's not a must. An important thing, and we almost talked about this like 10 minutes ago when you asked, but ABM never sits in and of itself. So when you have an ABM campaign and there is no demand, you are unknown, it's not going to work. So a hard truth that we had to learn is ABM is not a magic bullet, in that it's not going to open the door to your cold accounts and then magically get you leads. The bigger context in which it sits is the whole go-to-market system, which starts with creating demand. Okay. So in other words, what needs to happen is, before you can approach companies successfully, they need to at least be aware of you and know you, like you, and trust you, ideally. Okay. And without that, so when you're going totally 100% cold, it's very difficult these days, especially in competitive markets, to bridge that gap. Okay. But so like in the United States, where we operate a lot, most markets are super competitive. So without a solid content strategy and a content distribution strategy, we're not even taking on projects anymore, because it's just so hard. It's a prayer. But when you have that content mechanism, when you have content to play with, when you can, generate some traffic and give the visitor some real value before you engage them, that's when ABM really shines.
Okay, so that's your disqualification criteria, basically.
There you go. Yeah.
So we just further developed your ICP. I send you the invoice later.
Yeah. Feel free to invoice me after the show for that advice.
Okay, cool. So at our event on October the 8th, you're going even deeper into that, and you're showing the attendees how to build a predictable B2B pipeline, also with this AI at core in ABM. What's going to be the big takeaway people will get from your session?
I'm going to give you guys a system, like pretty much the architecture, a step-by-step system. We can even get into the prompts that we use, and I can certainly share that with the audience.
Well, that's a huge takeaway already, I tell you.
Okay. If you put it that way, my 20-minute talk is going to be less about smart things that I share with the audience or smart things that you didn't know. It's going to focus on, okay, if you need to build pipeline, and if things are unpredictable, and if things are broken, then here is a very smart process that you can apply pretty easily, relatively easily. And here are the steps, and here's what you need to look out for. Here are the components, and here are the prompts that you need to use. So basically, they're going to walk away with a system. They're going to be like, okay, let's do that, or let's not, but at least we have a plan. So that's the main idea.
That sounds really good. So for everyone who wants to join, still, Dan will be at our event on October 8th, and it's at our format LinkedIn Local Vienna, and we're focusing on account-based strategies. We have two guest speakers. One of them is Dan. The other one is Wilfried Lechner von Wienerberger. He will talk about a B2C to B case, also an interesting side of the B2B communication, B2B marketing and sales world. And it was really a pleasure talking to you, Dan. And I'm very much looking forward to your talk on the 8th. Anything you want to say before we close this interview?
No, I'm just really looking forward to it. And thanks a lot for the invitation. And I'm looking forward to having conversations with you guys after we're done. And before
That's amazing. So if people want to contact you directly, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. And I guess you're going to link my profile wherever people are watching this. Our website is clearb2b.com, and clear is with a K to keep things a bit funky, even though it's B2B. And so, yeah, those are the two main avenues to talking with me.
Okay, very cool. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a good day. See you next time.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.